Hello, the title of this short presentation is Cow-Calf Producer Preferences for Voluntary Traceability Systems. It's well known that there's many years now of history of ongoing discussions throughout the U.S. livestock industry on whether a national animal identification traceability system is needed, and then more narrowly what the details of such a system, if it was to exist, should be. For instance, there were several years to where USDA was trying to implement what they call National Animal Identification System, or NACE. That, for all intents and purposes, is now no longer in operation. Funding for that program is now zero, and USDA is now moving forward with something they describe as a new flexible framework that's administered at the state level rather than federal level. This is a constantly developing situation. There's lots of contention among livestock producers, both within species as well as across species here in the U.S., and lots of unanswered questions that lie at the heart of why there's contention. One of the key things to note in previous discussions is the cow-calf sector of the beef industry is particularly split and particularly divergent on whether the traceability system at the national level is needed, and B, what that should look like. This is one of the industry segments that voiced the most concern over the NACE system when it was being discussed, and yet there's lots of things that aren't known at that sector as it relates to national animal ID systems. In particular, what's really unknown is what should a national traceability system look like in order to encourage and recruit voluntary participation of cow-calf producers, because that's one of the things that NACE suffered was under the voluntary approach, it failed to meet some expected or target participation rates. So a key question is, why was that the case? That needs to be answered going forward as we look at future national animal identification system developments. Accordingly, the purpose of this presentation is to highlight the findings of a related study. My collaborator in this was Schulz, who's a graduate student here at K-State. Actually conducted this work while he was a master's student at Michigan State University. And the key objective of this study was to determine what preferences U.S. cow-calf producers have for voluntary traceability system attributes. Here you'll see some individual targeted pieces. Particularly, we developed forecast of voluntary participation rates of different ID systems, how sensitive those forecasts are to alternative market situations, where there might be dollars per head premiums or discounts in their different market situations, how sensitive these forecast and participation rates are to who's in charge of maintaining the data and administering the system, for instance, whether that's USDA as a governmental entity or if it's a private entity, how additional information such as requiring use revealing things such as health status of the animals or the age of animals, how those kind of things influence participation rate in alternative systems. And then finally, we wanted to determine what the welfare effects of imposing a mandatory traceability system would be under some different scenarios. I don't have time to highlight all these findings. Fact sheets and actual journal articles are available on Ag Manager's website that have more details here, but what I want to do today is just give a quick summary of a couple of the key findings. What we did is we conducted a survey in November 2007 in collaboration with Beef Magazine of 2,000 U.S. cow-calf producers. We got about 30% response rate, give us a nice national sample of U.S. cow-calf producers across the country, so we have a nice cross-section of preferences, views, perceptions on this issue. The particular part of the survey that I want to talk about today is the responses to what we call choice experiments. And in this particular study, what the choice experiment is basically a series of questions or scenarios to where we ask cow-calf producers to reveal what traceability system would they elect to participate in. Again, this is a voluntary system. We're not working under a mandatory system in these scenarios. Given that the systems vary in the price per head that you'd receive for your product, who manages it, whether that's a government, USDA, or a private sector, private entity, non-governmental. And then thirdly, if additional information such as age verification, health certificates, so forth is required. So we allow those, if you like, system attributes to vary across multiple questions, and what we're able to do is estimate various economic models to map out what producer preferences are and ultimately what they're willing to pay to have their preferred system relative to others. This also facilitates calculation of what the welfare effects on producers would be of forcing particular participation rates. One of the key things that we learned through this study was not surprising, but we basically confirmed our expectations, is the cow-calf producer segment is quite diverse as it relates to their preferences for animal ID systems. In particular, we estimated a model that suggests there's kind of three types of producers, not just one type, and these three vary a lot in terms of their operational characteristics, whether or not they already had their premises registered with USDA, whether or not they use auctions and so forth, as well as what their just raw preferences for traceability systems are. So for instance, how open they are to participating in a system managed by the USDA. More details on that are available in the paper, as I noted, but the key point from this is we found 3 different types, there's 3 different segments of producers, and this must be noted in future discussions that it's a very diverse set of producers that operate at the cow-calf market level, and any nationwide system has to take that into account because by definition, one segment is going to like one system more than another, and there's always going to be contention from one segment when you're dealing with a voluntary nationwide system. The key economic finding, if you like, that I want to highlight in this presentation is what are the welfare effects of imposing some kind of mandatory national system. And these calculations are absent any market effects. So basically they're assuming there's no free market premium for participating in a traceability system. Okay? So if you like, these are kind of exaggerated lower bounds, or they're exaggerated negative numbers. They'd be less negative if the market was providing some kind of premium. First of all, I'll remind you there's 3 classes here because we have 3 different groups of producers. About half of the producers were in what we call the premise registered class 1 group. About a fifth of them, 22%, were in this class 2, and the remaining roughly third were in this class 3 auction users group. What you can see here is these are all negative numbers, and that reflects my comment on the assumption of no market premium effects, but effectively all 3 groups would experience some negative welfare effect if there was imposed a mandatory system. That makes sense because in the absence of imposing it, if it didn't happen on its own, not happen on its own for a reason, so producers will experience a negative welfare effect, again, based upon the assumption of no market premiums. That is, we're assuming no beef market trade adjustments here, which may well exist if there is national traceability system in place and so forth. So this isn't necessarily complete, but the main point it does is it highlights the divergent welfare effects that you would observe on producers at the cow-calf level under different mandatory policy scenarios. The primary conclusions from this short summary, which are again highlighted more in the paper and fact sheet on the website, are heterogeneity definitely exists at the cow-calf producer level. This must be noted in all future discussions about national animal ID systems because it's not important only for the cow-calf sector, it's important for the entire beef industry and more generally for the entire livestock industry in the U.S. Secondly, removal of traceability options in the form of mandating or participation in some system does have negative welfare impacts on producers, again assuming no market adjustments, no export market expansion and so forth. That just confirms previous findings, but the key point was those welfare impacts are quite divergent across producer groups, and hence you're going to have different levels of contentious responses to mandatory policy discussions at the national level. The bottom line take-home point of this is, as long as the U.S. is operating under livestock market situations similar to what we have today here in July 2010, and we're operating under a realm of voluntary traceability system management and approaches, we're not likely to see wide voluntary adoption at the cow-calf producer level. What this study does is it maps out some of the reasons that you observe partial adoption, and that is because it maps out heterogeneity among the producers, and more narrowly gives some guidance to USDA and future policymakers and decision makers on what might be a better approach to targeting some of the more concerned segments of the cow-calf producer industry, which is laid out, as I said, more in the paper that's available here on the website at agmanager.info, and questions can be directed to me here on my email address. Thank you.